Hi everyone, welcome to Aquatics by Nature. Today I thought I'd give you a little bit of a personal insight into my thoughts on how long do natural aquaria actually last. There seem to be a lot of misconceptions and confusions on this subject online, so I thought it deserved a video all of its own. Firstly, I think I should probably go into what I mean by a natural aquarium. These are basically aquariums which are often referred to as dirtied aquariums or Walstad aquariums, aquariums that run or are designed to run in tune with nature. And these are generally aquariums that have a soil layer which is then capped with sand or fine gravel, although not necessarily exclusively, but that's what they're most well known for. And one of the things that you find online is that a lot of people say that these aquariums only last for really quite a short period of time, maybe 6 to 12 months. Well, I'm going to try and explain why I don't believe this is actually correct and that this is actually a misconception of what these tanks are and how they're actually designed to function in the first place. I'm going to try and do this video literally off the top of my head without editing, because I think it's quite a complex subject and I think you need to sort of hear my natural train of thought on it. So my apologies if there's a few corrections and ums and ahs along the way, but I think this will be the best way of addressing it. One of the things that people find is that when you set up one of these aquariums, you actually get really rather explosive plant growth. And I think one of the first things that I need to do a little bit on is why this actually occurs in the first place. When you set up one of these aquariums, you're basically submerging terrestrial soil. Now, terrestrial soil is nearly always way more fertile than natural aquatic soil would be, a soil that has been permanently submerged for millennia or certainly a long period of time. Subsequently, when you submerge this soil and then cap it with sand or gravel, as I say, you're basically putting a ton of excess nutrients in the tank, which is basically a big sort of accelerator pedal to the tank, which makes it really grow very fast. But this is not the only thing that you're doing. You're actually also introducing a whole host of microorganisms that are in this soil, some of which are capable of living underwater because they actually live in damp soil, which when you get down to a microbial level is basically underwater anyway. But also some of these organisms will actually die when you submerge them. When you submerge these microorganisms and they die in this way, they start to decay. And the decay of these microorganisms, like any decay in actual fact, produces CO2. So now you're in a situation where you have extremely nutritious soil underneath your sand or gravel cap, and you have a CO2 supply being produced, certainly in the early term when you submerge this soil. But that isn't all. There's actually a third sort of stage to this, as it were. In the soil, pretty much however well you clean it or what have you, you'll find there's quite a considerable amount of basically carbon locked up in the form of organic material. And exactly the same happens with this organic material. When you submerge it in this way, to some degree this organic material will start to decay. And this decay not only releases yet more nutrients, but it also releases again more CO2. So basically when you start off one of these tanks, as I say, with your soil layer underneath, you're starting off with incredibly rich nutritional soil, which is then producing CO2 from various forms of decay. And many people actually liken a new Walstad or dirty tank to actually having a CO2 tank, because growth is explosive, the plants pearl like crazy, everything grows fantastically well. And this makes these tanks seem almost like a miracle. And you see videos online, which is better, garden soil or aqua soil, for example, or CO2 tanks, all these kind of things. And these are all based around this reaction to when you start a new tank and all these processes that go on that just give you this explosive growth. But there is a bit of a problem where this is concerned, is this explosive growth that you get at this stage is temporary. It's not sustainable. It is literally just there to be burnt off in those early stages, because this is not what one of these aquariums is about. This is literally just the settling down period of one of these tanks. It's what I would like to describe as phase one, really. Phase one of 2, possibly 3 phases in actual fact. But I'm afraid it's an unsustainable phase. It is just the tank settling down. Now this might last a few months, it might last for a year, but it'll taper off. And as this starts to taper off and you start to go into what I would describe as stage 2, is kind of where the problem lies. And this is where I feel that the misconceptions and confusion really arises. Because what happens at this stage, because the nutrients and things and CO2 start to deplete and reduce that are being produced, some of the plants start to wane. And what you'll find starts to happen is you start to find survival of the fittest starts to kick in. But the problem is that when you look at the plants in the tank, it's very easy to think, well, they're no longer growing as well as they used to grow, and think that there is actually something wrong. But in my view, this is really not the case. It's simply the tank switching gradually from its unsustainable state into the second fully long-term sustainable state. And I think this is probably the greatest misconception. This initial period is not what these tanks are about, certainly not in my view anyway. It's this second stage onwards where the tank actually starts to become sustainable, that is actually the reality of a dirtied or a Walstad tank. And the beauty of this is once a tank goes into this stage 2, it does become fully sustainable. And I found with my tanks is that once you're in this stage, that sustainability appears to be endless. There really doesn't seem to be any end to it. But what you'll find is, as I say, you get this survival of the fittest start to kick in. And the type of plants that will actually grow from that stage onward will start to switch and start to change. You often find that the stem plants that grew fantastically well in the early stages are the ones that start to sort of fizzle out, and their growth is not good, and some of them will even actually die. But the good news is these are generally replaced by the long-term sort of deep-rooted plants, things like cryptocorynes, Amazon swords, that kind of thing, which are really long-term plants. This is really where it's all about. At this stage, I think it's really easy to see or feel that the tank is actually failing. But as I say, this is really not the case. This is really the tank becoming its true self. And it's this true self, as I say, which will last forever. Then you may have to completely rethink your planting choice, because the tank will actually evolve bit by bit into something which may look very, very different to what you're starting with in the beginning. But as I say, the most important thing is always to try and adhere to the survival of the fittest. If a plant doesn't grow for you, don't keep it. It's not benefiting the tank, and therefore it's not suitable for your particular tank. And I think this is something else which is easily forgotten. It's not you that chooses what plants grows in these tanks. It's actually nature or the actual individual environment that you've created. I've never yet had a tank that won't grow plants, although you often find that every tank will grow different plants. But this is completely normal. And once your tank switches into this fully sustainable stage 2, this very much becomes the case. And I think this misconception, as I see it, that these tanks last a very short time, is very much based on this switch that the tank makes over a period of time. And I think just a little bit of a misunderstanding that that is how these tanks actually are meant to be and how these tanks should be. As I say, but that really is not the case, certainly not to my mind anyway. It's this long-term situation which is really the one you want to strive to create, because that is the one that will be maintained really as long as you want to. I should add that this aquarium you're watching was set up in 1995, and it has spent most of its life in this sustainable phase 2. All that is added to this aquarium is fish food and top-up water. All the plants you can see are entirely sustained from this and nothing more. It's just a wonderfully simple way of running a tank, and just as I say, to me the most rewarding way as well. If you want to know more about how I maintain these plants so naturally, without water changes or fertilisers, I'd be eternally grateful if you'd subscribe and give me a like. And if you'd like to support this channel and its future projects, please consider becoming a member. That would be absolutely awesome. You can also check out my playlists, but most importantly, enjoy your aquarium. Don't be a slave to it. Thanks for watching, and as usual, I'll let the video play on for a bit for those who like to watch the fish. Thank you.